Hello and welcome to the mid-off season episode of the IslesNation podcast. I'm joined today by Mike Rankuski, James Duffy, going to college soon, and Andrew Wells. How are you guys doing today?
Doing great.
Doing good.
Yeah, I'm pretty good. Glad to be here.
All right, well, I'll get right into it. The Islanders' off season has been very quiet, a little too quiet for some of us. I know other people aren't as concerned. But we'll get into it with the draft where the Islanders traded Griffin Reinhart for a first and a second round pick. And they selected Matt Barzal and Anthony Beauvillier, I think that's how it's pronounced, after trading back up into the first round with Tampa. So basically, Duffy, I just want to know your opinion on whether or not you think the Griffin Reinhart for the draft picks trade was a good trade for the Islanders.
I think it was good, especially because it came so close to the Dougie Hamilton trade, and Hamilton got a first and 2 seconds as a proven guy who put up a great season with Boston. Reinhart has hardly played in the NHL. When he's played, it hasn't looked great, and you get a similar return that turns out maybe being better picks. I think it's an incredible trade. Even if Reinhart pans out, I don't think it'll be much more than a second or third pair defenseman, and Barzal and Beauvillier together much outweigh what Reinhart can be.
Mike, do you think that Griffin Reinhart is a bad pick for the Islanders? Do you think that the trade the trade Snow made, fixes the bad draft pick, or do you think Snow still has to take blame for wasting yet another top five draft pick?
He definitely turned out to be I'm not going to say he's a bust just yet because, he's still somewhat young, but, I think it was clear, and Duffy alluded to it, the more he played, I think the less his value would have been. And, it's tough to say, well, I know some people say, well, you took him 5th overall, you trade him for a 16th and a 33rd, that's terrible value, but I think you need to, look at each draft class individually and compare it that way. Obviously a top 5 pick from 4 years ago is different than what the top 5 picks were this year. So, yeah, do I think Snow made a bad pick? Probably, but to his credit, he got what looks like very good value. Who knows if these two kids they wound up taking will be anything. Obviously, by all accounts, Barzal is supposed to be pretty decent. And he obviously looks like he fell a little bit in draft. But, yeah, it's definitely another knock for people who don't like Snow to say, you know what, for someone who claims he wants to, build through the draft, and it's another top 5 pick. That's 2 years in a row of top 5 picks that have gone by the wayside. So, to his credit, though, he got good value, I think, anyway. Trading for a guy who I think the more he plays will, at best he'll be a third pairing guy, in my opinion.
And I do think when you look at Reinhart and where he was picked at 5th overall, you got to look at the draft around him. There were guys on the board there with some value. There was I think Morgan Riley went right after him, and I know Jacob Trouba was in that same draft.
Philip Forsberg in that draft too.
Yeah, and it really all matters where, at the end of the day, if you think now, because you can't really consider Reinhart as part of the Islanders anymore, so you got to say down the road, is Barzal and Beauvillier, the return for that, better than anything they could have gotten at 5 overall, which I think, in perspective, it is.
Oh yeah, if you look at that draft with Reinhart, the picks immediately after him, like you said, there were a number of defensemen that went right after who have all been in the NHL for several years, who have all played significant games so far, and who look to be, big pieces for their teams going forward. And I think Reinhart, his skating just never seemed to improve after 4 years. I know people point to Tavares and say, well, he was a bad skater when he got drafted, and look at him now. He's definitely he's improved that ability a lot. But Reinhardt's already, 21, 22 years old, and you're talking about someone, again, it's been 4 years, and it looks like there just hasn't been enough progress. So I can't fault Snow for pulling the trigger and moving him, even if he obviously, some of his critics, point to it as a failure of a draft pick.
In terms of him being a failure of a draft pick, at the time of the draft, the Oilers were considering taking him 1st overall that year. That was the Yakupov draft, and Yakupov wasn't totally what they were looking for because they just drafted Nugent Hopkins and Hall, and they have Everett at right wing, and they were thinking Reinhardt, and then you could say he slipped to 4. You could say it was a little bit of a reach at 4 because he could have gone anywhere between 4 and 9. But I don't blame Snow at all for making the pick. But as you said, the defensemen after him have just been they've been great. Morgan Riley's been really good. I think Hampus Lindholm is one of the better defensemen in the NHL already, and he went 6th overall. Matt Dumba looks pretty good in the NHL, and I love Jacob Trouba. I think he's awesome.
You have to think that draft was rumored that the Islanders offered their whole draft to move up to number 2 with Columbus to take Ryan Murray.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you got to think that Garth probably wasn't enamored with taking Reinhardt in the first place. But then, I mean, the Islanders, we don't have Carrier Harris on, but you can tell the organization is looking at advanced stats with their offseason moves and their drafting. So you got to think that Griffin Reinhardt doesn't fit the mold of an advanced stats type of player, which is a puck mover, keeps the puck in the offensive zone. So you got to think that between that draft and now, the Islanders have had a huge mindset change, which probably made Reinhardt even less appealing to the Islanders than he was then, which obviously they wanted Murray, who is a good defenseman, but he hasn't looked as a number 2 overall pick just yet. So who knows how Murray will turn out. But
He's
anything
also
will happen.
since he came into the NHL.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Murray can't stay healthy. He's had ankle issues, he has had shoulder issues. I think he had a knee issue as well. So again, I don't, and I do remember that Pete, that rumor that that Snow was willing to trade basically 6 or 7 picks to move up to number 2. So for Murray, and obviously that doesn't happen. So he takes Reinhardt. Then it kind of makes you think, well, obviously Reinhardt didn't pan out here. Murray hasn't panned out yet, in Columbus. And then it's like, well, if those are his 2 targets, who out of the top 10, maybe the 2, worst picks so far, arguably, is it fair to trust Snow with his drafting, after that? Because it seems like those 2 guys anyway were, tough picks.
You got to also acknowledge the fact that that was the draft. The Islanders selected 7 defensemen.
Yep.
Selected Reinhardt at 4, Polka at 34, Pellick at 65, Louis Leduc at 103. Who else? Let's see.
Sombody's in there, I think. Yep.
Doyle Summerby at 125, Jesse Graham at 155,
Kyle Burrows.
Jake Bishop at 185. No, I think Burrows was a Tavares draft, I think.
No, Burrows at 2013 or 2014.
No, but so anyway, out of those defensemen, you got Letty for Polka, and the other 6 are, Pellick's a decent prospect, not a top prospect by any stretch of the imagination, but 7 defensemen, and you've got nothing on your NHL team to show for it, unless you consider it. Well, Polka is a good prospect, and you got Letty, but if you pick 7 defensemen and none of them on your team making an impact right now, I don't know. You got to wonder.
Yeah, no, I think it's a fair question and a fair statement because again, for a team and organization that obviously is trying to build through the draft, or at least that was their motto up until last year, essentially. They've had some solid drafts, but they obviously haven't, like you said, this draft with Reinhardt, 7 defensemen, and basically none of them have made any impact with the team other than trading one for Nicoletti, which obviously worked out. And again, it's a little bit of a different situation because I think with Chicago, they obviously they didn't get equal value for Letty, and I don't think anyone would suggest that Paca was fair value, and with the other 2 guys that went to Chicago. So yeah, it is a little bit worrisome that a lot of people kind of hang their hats on. Well, we got this Garth Snow, this fantastic drafter. We have so many of these prospects. Our farm system is top notch, but that's a whole draft class that went by the wayside with really not much to show for it.
I think some of that does fall on the fact that they were kind of picking a dying breed there with stay-at-home, big-body defensemen, Reinhardt, Loic Duke, like Doyle Somerby to an extent, guys that really don't fit the mold that the NHL was trending towards and is now kind of set in. So
Well, you know what? I guess we'll find out soon enough. Was it a bad draft pick or was it bad development? I mean, maybe he goes to Edmonton and becomes a top four guy that that they envisioned, and he has a good career, and that's that. And then, or maybe and I think it'll be the latter, where I think he's going to struggle because I don't think he's a good enough skater, and I think again, I don't see him being much more than a third pairing guy, in the NHL.
Andrew, do you think it's a positive on Snow's reputation that in the 2009 draft he had a fifth overall, no 2008 draft he had fifth overall pick, traded down to get Bailey, who hold your opinions on him, is a average NHL player. 2010 he turned You Don't Need a Rider, a fifth overall pick, into Clutterbuck. 2012 with Reinhardt, fourth overall pick. Do you think it's a positive or a negative indication that this team is where they are right now, with three pretty much wasted top five picks in 5 years?
I mean, I would say look at every situation individually, not just look at it as three top five picks that could have been, a different situation now. In the 2008 draft, that was the first draft I think that really got the Islanders prospect board to be like one of the best in the NHL. He traded down from, what was it, 5 to 7, and then 7 to 9. Got a lot of picks in return. One of those picks turned into Travis Hamonic. And that's kind of tough to say that was a bad move. Yeah, he took Bailey, and I can't stand Josh Bailey. And I think that was a bad move because he had other guys like Colin Wilson available, Mikhail Bodker. I know Cody Hodgson just got bought out, but I think he's still a good player.
Eric Carlson.
I'm sorry?
Eric Carlson.
Eric Carlson was 15th. Tyler Myers was 12th, I believe. And then in 2010, I mean, Nino just cried his way out of New York. There's nothing you could do about that. I mean, he's a solid player for Minnesota. I wouldn't call him the missing piece for the Wild, but he cried his way out of New York, and Snow did his best to keep him, and then just decided to let him go. And I love Clutterbuck, so even though it wasn't good value, I'm still happy that we have Clutterbuck. And Reinhardt, yeah, that one he screwed up. I mean, he didn't develop the way that he wanted to. I actually wrote an article a while back about, I don't know if you guys remember, Reinhardt's father at the home opener said that he thinks both of his sons, including Sam, belong in the NHL, and neither one of them were NHL ready. Both of them get sent back down to the minors or juniors, and I wouldn't be surprised if Paul Reinhardt had a couple of run-ins with Snow, and that's just my speculation. But what does it say about Snow? I mean, I think he's taking a lot of focus into what Mike said before about how you're a bad skater. It's okay because look at Tavares. He was a terrible skater coming into the NHL. He fell every single shift, and now that's the strongest part of his game. So I think Snow has this mindset where, you're a bad skater. It's okay. We'll teach you how to be a good one, and it just doesn't work unless you're, a superstar John Tavares. But I mean, I'm happy with a lot of the other drafts he's had. I think the defenseman draft still has time to develop into a good one. I love the Ryan Pulak pick. He was my guy in that draft, and I think he's going to be a really good NHL player. And then Dal Cole was also my guy, and I love the Ho-Sang pick too. I think he's what's going to make Oposo expendable. I know we're getting into that later, but I still think Snow is a good GM, and you can't really look at those three examples that you made to say, is he a good GM or is he a bad GM?
All right, we'll move on from Reinhardt and talk about the players the Islanders drafted. At 16, they drafted Matt Barzal, and at 28, they drafted Anthony Beauvillier. So basically, the Boston Bruins traded Martin Jones and Milan Lucic and Dougie Hamilton, and they ended up getting 3 straight first-round picks at 13, 14, and 15, with Barzal and the guy Kyle Connor on the board, who were projected to go around there. And Boston selected none of those and went off the board pretty much with all 3 picks. And I could just sense that Garth Snow, when the Bruins were making their picks, was like 1 down, 2 down. And once the third name was announced, he had to make that trade. The Islanders are supposedly in love with Barzal. So basically, Duffy, what have you got to say about Barzal and the Islanders move up to draft him?
I think, like you said, Snow was looking at that draft board and saying, I'm going to try to get Matthew Barzal, and when he fell to 16, Edmonton was known to be trying to shop that pick a little bit. he knew he had to make that move, especially because Edmonton likes Reinhardt, who we talked about earlier. Barzal is a great player, a great pick, and he's the kind of guy that I could see in 3 or 4 years as the perfect second line center under John Tavares. He's quick, crafty, got a good shot, great playmaking ability. I think the pick is one of the better value picks in the draft, and honestly, there's really nothing bad to say about it, in my opinion.
Where does that put Ryan Strome then, if Barzal's a second line center? You
I'd
put
say
him with
Strome.
Tavares?
Yeah, Strome keep on the wing. I'd play him with Tavares or Barzal, depending on how things pan out with a guy like Oposo.
M- Andrew, what do you got to say about Barzal and Pavillier to a lesser extent?
Yeah, I mean, I love the Barzal pick. I mean, he could have gone seventh to Philly. He could have gone to any of the Boston picks, and he slipped to us, luckily. And I think, like Duffy said, he's going to be the perfect second line center behind Tavares, which is something that I think every team, all the contenders are trying to do. Kopitar and Carter. I know that they're not contenders yet, but the Dallas has Sagan and Spezza. Um, having two really big centers or big in terms of skill and just being a really good player is really important now. So having Barzal, who projects to be have the same sort of playing style as Claude Giroux, maybe not as physical, and obviously won't score 90 something points playing second line behind Tavares, but I think he was a great pick for the Islanders. And then the Beauvillier pick, uh, I didn't actually hear too much about him before the draft, but everything I've read about him so far, he's getting a lot of comparisons to Jaden Schwartz. He's a really hard worker, and he's had chemistry with Barzal playing in a couple tournaments together. And I mean, that could not have been a coincidence when they were looking for their second first round pick. Um, so I'm a big fan of Barzal and Beauvillier, and I project them to both be second line forwards in the NHL.
Mike, what have you got to add?
I mean, I'm not going to sit here and pretend like I know much about either guy. I mean, obviously, just from what I read on, around the draft after they took these guys, and it seemed like many of the experts thought the Islanders did a good job in getting good value at 16 and then 28. So that's how I see it as a look. It seems like they got good value. Will these guys pan out? I mean, obviously, no one knows. Again, considering that it essentially turned into the equivalent of Reinhardt and a third round pick for two firsts. And I think that, I mean, I would make that trade every day of the week just because, again, I'm not high on Reinhardt, and I don't want to go back and harp on him too much, but I think you have to tie it all together. I just think it was good value. Whether or not either of these kids turn out to be anything special, we'll see in a few years. Ideally, Barzal will be a slot in the center position behind Tavares and possibly Strom, depending on what they do with him. But I think it's good value. I have no other opinion on the guys. I can't say I've watched their YouTube clips or anything or watched their games, but to me it turned out to be Snow made a good value trade by getting rid of Reinhardt and a third for those two guys. And at least it looks like on paper, the forward prospects in the organization is fairly deep, which is I think last year they couldn't say that.
Can you pronounce Strome for me again, please?
Strom, what did I say?
Strom.
Did I?
And let's hope, please, that the fact that 2 years in a row the Islanders got the Rangers' first round pick from that terrible Marty St. Louis trade. So that's just another incentive for Beauvillier to be really good. And they traded up for nothing. I mean, only giving up a third round pick to move up 5 spots to get into the first round. I mean, I thought that was a brilliant move by Snow.
Yeah, no,
Another.
I think value. I definitely think value-wise, it looks like he got very good value for what he traded. Again, what these guys turn out to be, even like last year with Ho-Sang, I know everyone was kind of raving about like, oh, it's it's a big time pick. It's got the potential to be really, and it does. It's all potential. It's all about getting value in the draft. But I mean, unless these guys are special talents, and like what I consider special talents are like the Tavares type of guys, you're not going to see them for at least 2 or 3 years anyway. So they got good value. Whether it turns out these guys turn out to be anything special, we'll see. But I give Snow full marks for turning a diminishing prospect and Reinhardt into two better prospects. I'll say.
Another thing I have to add to Andrew's point is the fact that all week we heard the Rangers were going to trade Cam Talbot to the Oilers for the 16th overall pick, and Snow is just like, nah, fam, I got this.
It's funny when that was happening. I mean, I was watching the draft in my house, and you guys know with several little children running around, it's not the easiest to listen to the TV and try to keep up with them. So, as it's going on, I'm watching it and I kind of flipping around and between other stuff, and all of a sudden I hear there's been a trade, and it was with Edmonton's pick, and I'm thinking, oh man, they really got Talbot, for the first. And I said and I'm thinking that's a great deal for the Rangers, and as Bettman starts announcing, he says, and with the New York Islanders, and I said, and I paused, and it was one of the few times I can remember in any type of draft where I actually was like my jaw dropped because it was such like a to me it was such out of left field, and again, yeah, it would be nice though if those two picks, that the Islanders eventually got through, as a result of that St. Louis trade, turn out to be big time players for the Islanders and haunt the Rangers for years to come.
Can't we all hope? Anyway, moving on, the Islanders re-signed restricted free agents Anders Lee and Thomas Hickey. Anders Lee signed a 4-year contract worth $3.75 million a year, and Thomas Hickey signed a 3-year contract worth $2.2 million a year, I believe. So basically, Duffy, what do you think of the two signings? Do you think it's fair value? Where do you see him slotting in the future? Lee for 4 years, Hickey for 3.
I think Hickey is the pretty much perfect quintessential third pair defenseman, and the money that they gave him is fair for that kind of role. He's going to slide in there very well for a while, and once he leaves, it gives some of the younger players, like the draft picks in the last 2 years, to kind of slide into that role. Lee, on the other hand, I'm not as high on as most people are. I understand, he had a great year, 20-plus goals. I don't know how much better he's going to get than that, so I don't like that his contract's a little bit backloaded. But 20 goal scorers don't grow on trees, so they had to resign him. They had to lock him up. The deal overall I like. Well, I don't think he's the best player. I don't think he's going to really improve much on his game. They had to pay him because they had to keep him. So I like both deals. Hickey's more than Lee's.
Mike, what do you think?
I'm gonna go the other way and say I'm not crazy about either deal. I didn't think Hickey deserved a 3-year contract. I understand, some people love his metrics and all that other stuff. And while there's definitely some merit to that, I do think, I mean, just watching the playoff series, and I understand he didn't get hurt during the series, but you can't tell me Washington wasn't targeting a smaller player, and I do think that is a struggle. And again, I know some people, size doesn't matter, who cares, blah blah blah. I don't know. I think there's still some element that if I'm bigger than you and I hit you over and over again, especially over the course of a 7-game series, it's probably going to take a toll on you. So I thought maybe they'd re-sign him for a year or two at most. I think by signing him to 3 years, I just think the team is, and the same for Lee. I mean, I know it was a 4-year deal, and I agree with Duffy's point that 20-plus goal scorer, there's nothing to sneeze at. But I just feel like we're locking in, Snow's locking in this roster with all these, these deals, and I understand part of it is he's trying to, sign these guys younger for longer term and hopefully, kind of get better value for it, and sometimes they work out like it did with Oposo, and then sometimes it kind of backfires with Grabner. So I think we're kind of locking in a roster here that is by no means elite. It's a good roster, and obviously, if all these young kids progress, then it has a chance to be a very good roster, and possibly make do some damage in the playoffs. But I think we're committing so many long-term contracts to guys where I don't know. I didn't think the merits were there. I mean, I understand with Lee, again, what do you get? 25 goals, and again for a rookie, that's a solid, very good year. I'm with Duffy. I'm not crazy about his game. I don't think he's a very good skater. And I think a lot of his production is just a product of who he's playing with. And I think it does say something that he was, he benched the last two games of the playoffs. Again, it's a young kid struggling, but it does, I think, raise some flags when in the two most important games of the season, the coaching staff didn't have enough faith in him to, take any, to even dress. So not terrible deals, but just not. I'm not crazy about them. I think they just too long, the money, and whatever. But I just think Snow's locking in a roster that just, is it good enough? I don't know, but he's kind of really pushing his chips into the middle with this same group again.
Andrew, what do you think?
I'm okay with the lead deal. I was a little surprised with how much it was. I thought he would take a little bit less, but I mean, he is playing second line left wing. He did play really well with Tavares, and they don't have their answer at left wing yet until Del Cole comes in. So having Lee signed for 4 years at that price, I don't really find too much to complain about. I happen to like his game, even though I agree he's not a great skater, but I do think he brings like this element of physicality that Molson couldn't bring, and is really just as good a goal scorer. So I'm pretty happy with the lead deal. The Hickey deal I really don't like. Um, I think Hickey has been okay as an Islander, and the 3 years doesn't bother me as much as the fact that it's 2.2 million. I mean, that is locking yourself into Hickey being a regular defenseman when I think he should be the seventh. We all want a Christian Ehrhoff. We want so to trade for someone like Alec Martinez, and that just this Hickey contract kind of just took that possibility away. And I don't really see him as a long-term solution, especially Pellick could be coming up soon. Um, I'm not totally a fan of the Hickey contract and all. And like Mike and I think Duffy said this, but I think Mike definitely said this about how Hickey is just bullied with bigger players. As good or as heady as he can be, he can't handle physical play. Like he got trashed against the Capitals. And if we meet the Penguins in the playoffs, or if we meet the Capitals again in the playoffs, they're going to not take it easy on him. I mean, I hope they don't do what they did to Wisnowski to Hickey, but I'm really not a fan of bringing in Hickey at this term, because it's locking yourself into having him as a regular defenseman.
Personally, for me, I mean, do you guys think you'd feel differently about the league contract if Grabowski and Kuhlman weren't signed long term for almost 10 million combined?
Yeah,
No.
In all honesty, I think it's. I look at it independently as just giving Lee that kind of money when I'm not the biggest fan of the way he plays. And he draws the comparisons to Molson, but I see him as a much worse skater, a much worse shooter, and just more of a product of a high-powered offense.
You know what? I mean, it would make it easier to swallow, obviously, if you weren't paying those two guys nearly $10 million. And I mean, I'm sure we could talk about it later. And I would love to get rid of Grabowski's contract. But yeah, I mean, I agree with Duffy. It's for a guy who put up one good year, it's a pretty fair. I mean, it's a pretty big deal. And I just, I know it was only his first playoff experience, so it's not obviously completely fair to look at that and as an indictment of his play. But he really looked out of place in the playoffs against the Capitals. Yeah, I know he tried to stick up and fight Tom Wilson in Game 5, but he was, in my opinion, a complete non-factor. And obviously I'm not going to pin the series loss on him, but the combination of he was one of those guys who just disappeared, and when the team needed some secondary scoring, he was nowhere to be found. Does that mean he'll always be a bad playoff performer? Of course not, but it's a lot of money and a long term to commit to a guy who really had, I think, one good season, and I don't think you were at a point where you had to kind of shell out that type of contract for.
I happen to think that I'd prefer to have Anders Lee on my team than Grabowski. and Grabowski's making $5 million a year, which is crazy to think about. A little more than a year after he signed that contract, we're already like starting to regret it. When we were all so happy when he signed it last year, it kind of shows how far this team has come in a year.
Well, I
But
think part of it is also with Grabowski is again when you look at I mean, I think at the time no one was expecting the team to go get Boychuk and Letty and obviously pay them big dollars. Um, and I think that's part of the reason was with the Grabowski contract was they had the money, they had the cap space, so it wasn't as big a deal. And yeah, you overpay a few bucks to get the guy in and get a little respectability. But I think with everything else that happened, um, it just turned. If he's healthy, it's not a terrible contract, but obviously, this you can't count on him to be healthy for 80 games a season with his injury history. So, and again, I just go back to my other point. I think some of these contracts we're kind of locking in to this roster, and Andrew said it. It's true with Hickey. When you give the guy 2.25 million a year for 3 years, you're not paying him that money to sit on the bench or to sit in the press box. You're paying him to play, and unless you tell me that you're going to move Calvin DeHaan in a trade, you're pretty much locked into your top six, assuming you think Pulak is the real deal.
yeah, that point I agree with Andrew. Before the offseason started, I know the majority of us had Hickey penciled in as a 7, and you just can't afford to pay a seventh defenseman $2.2 million because as presently constituted, this defense is Boychuk, Letty, Hamonic, Dahan, Pulak, and Hickey with Straight as a 7, and we all know that we don't want Brian Straight as our number 7 defenseman. So basically, that contract guarantees another year straight on the big club, which might just be the worst part of it all. Sorry, Favre, if you're listening. But
I to bring something up. I don't think Kuhlman is overpaid. I know that Grabowski. I happen to like Grabowski, so I have no problem with him being an Islander. He's a little overpaid, but in terms of like his history, I mean, he might have just had a bad year. But in terms of Kuhlman, I don't think he's overpaid at all. I actually think he's fairly paid. I'm not going to call him a steal at all. But I mean, from the first game I saw him, especially at the home opener, I was so impressed with how hard he works. He's the hardest working player I've ever seen. And I think if we didn't have him, I know our penalty kill is terrible, but I blame that all on Cronin, not the personnel, player wise. And I think I have no problem with paying Kuhlman that little over $4 million, whatever he makes. And I don't see him. I know we're coupling Grabowski and Kuhlman because they came together, they're best buddies, they play on the same line all the time. But I think Kuhlman is perfectly paid for what he brings.
I do like Coolman as a player. I love the way he plays. I love his tenacity. But I don't think a championship level team could afford to pay a 15-goal third line player over $4 million. I mean, look at Chicago. They did it with Brian Bickle, and now they're dying to get rid of him. They healthy scratched him. I mean, I just think it's too much for what he is on the team.
Well, to be fair, Chicago won a cup even with Bickle's contract. So yeah, while it's not a good $4 million contract, I do agree with Andrew that Kuhlman, his overall game is pretty impressive, and he seems to be one of those guys you could put him anywhere in the forward group, and he kind of just does his job and does it well. I mean, by the playoffs, he was playing with Tavares and Strom on the first line. So, and of course, and he got obviously the game winner in Game 6. So, I do think that he is one of those guys where, yeah, he's not going to put up 25 goals and 50 points or 60 points most likely, but he is one. I think he is very responsible in his own end. I think by putting him with a guy like Tavares, it kind of allows Tavares to be a little bit more creative in the offensive zone, knowing that he doesn't. Not to say he doesn't be defensively responsible, but he is a guy like Kuhlman back there who could also pick up some of the mistakes he makes. So I'm with Andrew. Yeah, is he a steal at $4 million? Of course not, but I don't think for what he brings. I think he's good value.
And I think in terms of Grabowski, so he last year was overpaid, but he also was injured, played with post concussion syndrome, excuse me, He has had issues in his career, but if he can stay healthy for most of a season, he is one of our most offensively skilled players. And put him together on the right line, he can be, say, he plays 60 games, he can be a 35-point scorer, which it's not worth $5 million, but in the market today, it's not very far off either.
And that's why I think, having, Grabowski, I know it's hard only because he gets hurt a lot. When he's healthy, I think he's a much better player. I also think Franz Nielsen is overrated by most Islander fans, but that could be a whole other discussion for another time. But I think if we were, my ideal offseason would have been, and there's still obviously the opportunity to do this, would have been to trade Franz for a defenseman, move Grabowski at center, and then have your third line be Kuhlman, Grabowski, and Kirill Petrov. Because I just think, on paper and just the sound of that, sounds like an ideal third line. And Petrov coming into the NHL, would really transition a lot better playing with, Kuhlman, who's also a Russian, and Grabowski, who's from Belarus, so he's kind of Russian, not really. But, I think if you put Grabowski back at center, he was a little off playing wing. That's not his natural position. I mean, he played okay there, but obviously the games that he played center, he was much better. The only thing you can't rely on is him being healthy, but when he is, I see no reason not playing or thinking that he's not a better player than Franz.
So basically, you guys talked about the third line and a player that's not signed for this year yet is Brock Nelson. Nelson's still a restricted free agent. There haven't been any real talks in the media about his contract. So basically, Nelson started the season red hot and then tailored off, started the playoffs red hot with a 2-goal game, and then tailored off, and now he's a restricted free agent. So where do you guys see Brock Nelson filling in on this team, and what would you guys pay him?
It's that PDO, Pete. It's the PDO.
Harris is here now. Good to see you, Harris. I think someone pointed out in our group chat earlier with Alex Galchenyuk getting a 2-year, 2.8 per deal, like a little bridge deal for him. I think that Nelson could get something a little similar, maybe a little more money, around 3.2 or something like that. I know they wanted to kind of give him a long-term deal, but he wasn't all about that, so he's going to get that kind of bridge contract that's kind of dying out in the league, but I can see around 2 years, a little over $3 million for him.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I happen to, I like Brock Nelson's game. I definitely agree he was inconsistent, to say the least, this season. But I would give him 3 years, like $3 million or $3.5 million per year. I do think he, will eventually top out at like kind of a 25-goal scorer, maybe 55 to 60 points, and can be, competent in his own end. So I like his game. I mean, yeah, he has to obviously be more consistent, game to game, shift to shift. But I do think there's definitely some skill set there to work with. And I happen to like him better than Lee. I don't want to give him Lee's contract, but I think, I think 3 years, maybe $3.5 million a year is kind of where I would try to get him at right now.
And see, I actually agree with the 3.5, but I would actually try to use Nick Bjugstad's I'd use his contract as kind of a framework. Give him less money because I think Bjugstad makes 4.1. If you give Nelson 3.6, 3.7, something around there, I mean, you give him that 2-year contract, and there's the absolute possibility that he breaks out and then he commands $6 million a year or $5 million a year or something like that. You sign him for 6 years at a much lower rate. I think that's going to be a lot better long term. It'll help signing, Tavares in a couple years. If they decide to bring back Oposo, it'll help signing him. So I think giving him a 6-year contract instead of a 2 or 3 year contract would be better at this stage for Brock.
I just think the issue is they wanted to give him a 6 or 7 year deal, and I think he didn't want that. I may be wrong on that, but I think that's what I heard.
Well, I mean, that's totally possible if he has the same mindset as what I just said, where he knows that he could break out and really cash in a couple of years. From the Islanders' perspective, I would try to give him that 6-year contract right now.
See,
I don't.
I disagree with the 6-year deal. And again, I like Brock Nelson's game a lot, but I think again, you start giving everyone 5, 6, 7-year deals, you're locking in this roster, and we don't even know how good this roster is. I mean, if this roster was like, if let's say it had the success of the Blackhawks or the Kings, then yeah, I could see you want to maybe lock in some guys 6 and 7 years more, because you figure, okay, they've won before, and we'll try to win again with them. But I don't think locking in half the roster to 5, 6, 7-year deals is the way to build this. I think you're really hamstring yourself, and even though these are homegrown guys and everyone kind of gets more, affection towards them because they're one of our own, I think we need to be smart and keep flexibility here. And that's why I think I'll take a chance on a shorter term deal. If he breaks out and he becomes a 30-plus goal scorer and a big time player, then you know what? I'll pay him down the line and I'll work it around and I'll get rid of somebody else. But I'm not going to just start giving out 6 and 7-year deals because the off chance or the 50-50 chance that he breaks out into a big time player. I think it's too risky to keep locking in these guys for such long deals when the roster itself, we don't know how good this roster is.
I mean, I get what you're saying, Mike, and I agree with you that it's not the best situation to completely lock down a team that not much in the few years they've been together. But with the way the league is kind of set up now, let's say Nelson puts up, over the next 2 years, 50 and then 55 or 60 points. That's not necessarily breaking out, but he's still gonna garner a lot of attraction on the free market, get a lot of money, and with the way the Islanders are kind of putting themselves now, if they don't give him a long-term kind of medium-range money deal, they can't afford him if he ends up putting up even slightly above average contribution.
Then you move on. That's what all these draft picks you have the last couple of years, especially at forward, that's what they're there for. I mean, if Brock Nelson plays so well that he prices himself out and you don't want to pay him because you'd rather keep around some of the other guys who maybe make less money but you think can fill other roles, that's fine. Then you move Nelson, you get something else in return, and you just keep kind of the cycle going. But or you take your shot, and then if he walks at the end of his contract and you try to win a title, then he walks at the end of his contract. There's nothing against letting a guy play out his contractual obligation and move on. I mean, it happens all the time. You don't have to make sure it's like, well, if we don't, if we trade him now, we're not going to, or if we don't sign him now, we lose him for nothing. That's a bad asset management. I mean, not really. I mean, so to me, if he plays that well that he outprices himself, great. Then it means you probably have a really good team. You probably had some success in the playoffs as well, and you kind of live with it. And if he's a core guy and you want to sign him, you can maybe move some other contracts around to make it work. But if he says, you know what, I want to get every last dime I can get, which all the power if he could do it, then you move on and you thank him for his services and you go elsewhere. I mean, that's why you keep drafting and hopefully you keep a solid group of prospects that can kind of play under cheap contracts who can eventually take his spot. So I don't think just locking in a guy 7 years because he might break or he might put up 50 points next year and might make some money on the open market is smart business either.
I'm sorry, Duffy and Andrew, but are you guys insane? You want to give a 7 or 6 year contract to someone that went from December 19th to February 16th with 1 goal and then got benched in the playoffs because he was non-existent other than game 1? I just don't understand. I don't understand what you guys are saying. Unless Nelson takes a contract that's like $2 million a year, I'm not locking myself into Brock Nelson for 7 years after what he's proven at this point in his career. The guy right now is an average third-line player. Can he get better? Sure. But he just had an extremely inconsistent season and has proven nothing in the NHL. And you don't give a player like that 7 years. I'm sorry.
Okay, so consistency, that kind of comes with a little bit more experience, which Nelson is obviously getting. You can't say he's done nothing. He had 42 points this year, I believe, 22 goals. That's not doing nothing. Just because of the fact that it happened in spurts here and there doesn't mean it's nothing.
You mean shots are going off? You mean shots are going off his ass and in for the first week of the season?
He's put himself in position to get him in, isn't he?
Okay, I'd love to see you build your team around that.
I'm not saying he's
great of a
team around
situation. I mean, look at what happened with O'Reilly. He was insane in asking for $6.5 million a year after his entry-level contract, and now he got traded away because he was asking for over. I mean, his contract is absurd. $7.5 million for Ryan O'Reilly is ridiculous. And I'm not saying Brock's a completely different person. I think they're similar players, but person obviously I don't think Brock is like that. But you got to think of somebody like Ryan O'Reilly who may or may not have already changed the game when it comes to these bridge contracts and these long-term deals for overpaying because you're greedy. We don't know what Brock's situation is right now in terms of what he's asking for, but you got to think of Ryan O'Reilly's situation and how that could, you don't want to have that with us. That would be, I hate Ryan O'Reilly. But yeah, no, that's just my opinion. You don't want to have a Ryan O'Reilly situation. If you sign Brock to a 6-year contract below what you think his potential will be in 6 years, I don't see anything wrong with that.
I also don't see a team offer sheeting Ryan O'Reilly. I mean Brock Nelson, 2 years, $13 million. Ryan O'Reilly is not a good comparison because he got an insane offer sheet from a desperate team.
Yeah, I personally like Brock Nelson a lot. I mean, I root for him. I want him to do really well, but I just think trying to lock him up to a 6-year deal now is, even if, and yeah, obviously Pete brought up the stat. He scored 1 goal in about 2.5 months or whatever the exact date was. It's just bad business to basically, hey, every time someone has a good half a season, we're going to try to lock them up 5 or 6 years. Because, yeah, sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. But you're locked into these terrible contracts then if it doesn't work out for 6 years. At least with a shorter-term deal, you know what? If he busts, then you say, you know what? It's a short-term commitment. We move on, or we renegotiate a lower contract. And again, if he has a great breakout year over the next 2 or 3 years under this kind of bridge contract, you know what? If he's worth it, you pay him what he wants, what the market tells you. You can move some other contracts around to keep him there. And if he says, "Oh, I want $7 million or $6 million a year because I put up 55 points in 2 years in a row," then you say, "You know what? Thanks, but good luck going elsewhere." I mean, you can't manage a team living in the fear that if they break out and we can't afford them, what do we do? Well, then what you do is you move on. That's why you have drafts every year. That's why you bring in other guys. I mean, you can't keep, because you signed Nelson for 6 years. What are you going to do for Strom next year? You going to sign him 6 years also? Again, I think he's a good player, but do I want to sign him to 6 or 7 years right away? I'd like for him to maybe do it a couple of years before I, commit more than half a decade to him on my team. Because again, you're locking in this roster, and we just don't know enough about this roster right now if it's good enough to win.
I feel very similar to Mike, but Strome is a player I would lock up because Strome has been consistent in his NHL career, and he's done it at every level. And I don't know, I just look at Strome and there's something about him that makes me think he's the real deal, and I don't get that same feeling with Brock. So we'll move on to the Islanders' lone NHL free agent signing, Thomas Greiss, backup goalie, formerly of the Pittsburgh Penguins and the Arizona Coyotes and the San Jose Sharks. He backed up Marc-Andre Fleury last year. I believe he had a .908 save percentage with a winning record. So the Islanders let go Chad Johnson at the trade deadline last year, brought in Michael Neuvirth, and they let him walk to Philly, who signed Neuvirth to a similar contract that Greiss got. So basically, what do you guys think of the Greiss signing? Do you think the Islanders got a good backup goalie here? Do you agree with the signing in terms of replacing Neuvirth with him? Basically, what are your overall opinions and goals for Thomas Greiss? Duffy, we'll start with you.
I think Grice is a good backup goalie, but like you mentioned, seeing Neuvirth get almost the same contract from Philly was kind of the upsetting part of it. I thought Grice was a good option because I figured Neuvirth would outprice what the Islanders were looking for, considering they have their starter already. So, trying to ignore the Neuvirth aspect of it because he was my top choice for backup. I think he was the best backup on the market. Grice can be a solid backup, start 25, 30 games, better than Chad Johnson by a long shot, in my opinion at least. Give Halak the rest he needs to be a consistent starting goalie. So he is what he is. He's a average backup goalie in the league, and that's what we need right now. So,
Mike, you got anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, he's he's a backup goalie. If he plays 20 games competently or 25 games competently, that's all. I mean, it's all you really can hope for. If Halak goes down with any type of significant injury, the team's in trouble because Grice is a career backup for a reason. And I know last year everyone kind of thought we struck gold with Chad Johnson, and then obviously then we watched him play, and that kind of turned pretty quickly. So I just want a backup who, when he's in there, I don't feel like we're gonna need 5 goals to win every time. Just play average. Stop the saves. Stop the pucks you should stop. Once in a while, make a really nice save, and just give the team the chance to win. I mean, whether will he do that? I hope so. I don't know. I mean, Neuwirth, yeah, would have been a nice re-signing, but he probably figures he has a better shot to see more action with the Flyers. So I'm not going to get on the case of, when he signed for a similar deal. He probably looked at the situations and said maybe I have a better shot to play more minutes with the Flyers and go that route. So I just want a competent goalie. I don't need a superstar. I don't need a guy putting up a 925 save percentage as a backup. Just don't blow. Just be decent and give the team a chance to win. That's all.
Andrew, you got anything to add?
No, most of it's been said. I mean, Grice is a good backup. We need a good backup. 2 years, I mean, we just had that. That's the only thing that might be a little bit something that we could be worried about, just considering Chad Johnson came in, like Mike said, we thought we struck gold, and then we watched him play, and he was terrible. And thankfully, Snow was able to get rid of the fact, rid of that extra year, but we just got to hope that Grice doesn't have the same problems as Johnson. But I'm confident, he's a more skilled goalie. Duffy said he's miles better. I don't know about miles better, but he's definitely a better goalie than Chad Johnson. He has the pedigree. But the 2 years, you got to hope that he doesn't have a bad first year. But I like Grice. I had a feeling that they were going to sign him anyway after Neuwirth left. I had this feeling that they had a good feeling about Grice, so I wasn't surprised at all. And I'm, like Mike said, as long as he plays a solid 20 games, there's not going to be nothing to complain about.
Well, I do have a lot of Pittsburgh Penguins fans that follow me on Twitter from the 2013 playoff series where I really established myself as a douchebag. But as soon as we signed Grice, I got a bunch of tweets telling me that the guy falls apart in the third period, he blows games and all that. But I didn't think much of it, considering it was just like probably jealous Penguin fans. But then I did my research. I don't have the exact numbers, but Grice gave up 50 goals last year, and from what I remember, I did the research like a month ago. About 10 of those were in the first, about 10 of those were in the second, and almost 60-65% of the goals he gave up were in the third period or overtime.
He's going to fit right in then. That's fine.
We blow third period leads. He blows third period leads. Double jeopardy. We're good, right?
Heyo.
The streams are crossing.
You guys remember that game at the Coliseum in November, where the second half of the back-to-back, where the Islanders played Grice at the Coliseum, and Matt Martin scored his second of the year. He scored his first the night before, actually, late in the second period to tie the game. And then the Islanders ended up putting 4 or 5-1 because Grice couldn't stop a beach ball in the third period. So I'm just throwing that out there as something to might possibly look forward. I don't know if look forward to, but look towards to once the season starts. But it's just my point. Throw some stats in there.
I mean, part of that could be just the fact that Pittsburgh had a depleted, hurt, battered defense for most of the season. Like, I wouldn't know what he did in years before that. But it'd be interesting to see if being in Pittsburgh had any effect on his third period play.
Well, good thing we generally have a healthy defense. We don't have to worry about that.
Sarcasm.
No, I noticed.
But anyway, we'll move on to a more general topic with the team. The Islanders haven't really made any moves of substance this summer. What are your thoughts on Snow's decision to do this and go in this direction? And basically, what do you think of the roster going into the season, assuming no major changes are made? We're going to talk about how Columbus acquired Saad, the Capitals got Williams and Oshie, the Penguins got Kessel, Bonino, and Eric Fair. Is there a reason for concern for the Islanders going into this season? I'll start it off because I have a pretty strong opinion here. But Basically, this unfortunately reminds me of Garth's 2013 summer, where the Islanders finished off on a hot streak, made the playoffs, and he sat on his hands and did nothing to improve the team. And the Islanders came crashing back down to earth the next year. And if you think about it, the Islanders had an amazing November last year, where I think they won like 11 of their 15 games. Started off December hot, and then they were a mediocre team for the rest of the year. So honestly, who knows what the real Islanders are? And the fact that all these teams around us got better, the Capitals got better, the Penguins got better, and the Blue Jackets are going to be healthy this year. They finished off the season red hot, and they added Brandon Saad, so they're going to be better and healthier. The Rangers are still the Rangers. They're a great team, unfortunately. They got Henrik Lundqvist. And even if their team doesn't look that great on paper, they have a great coach and they find a way to win. The Flyers are always pesky Flyers. I mean, they have a good goalie in Steve Mason. They have Giroux, Voracek, Simmons. The defense is a wreck, but they'll still be competitive. The Devils have Corey Schneider, one of the best goalies in the league. Unfortunately for us, the Hurricanes are the Hurricanes, and they shouldn't pose any threat. But basically, I don't think the Islanders are a shoo-in for the playoffs as presently constituted. I know you guys are all going to say it, but this team really needs another defenseman. As I alluded to earlier in the show, Brian Strader is our number 7 defenseman right now. And with the Hans injury history, Hamnick's injury history, I mean, Hickey's small, Pulak's a rookie. Anything goes wrong, Brian Strader's the first guy to step in. And there's still some good unrestricted free agents out there. If Jesse was on right now, he would have slobbered Christian Ehrhoff's knob about 30 times. But there's Ehrhoff out there, there's Cody Franson, Mazzaros. There's probably a few more that I'm missing. But there's some good defensemen still have to be signed. And at this point in the summer, you got to think, if they just want a contract, they probably won't break the bank. The Islanders have a decent amount of cap room, so I don't see why they can't bring in a defenseman. The forward depth, there's a lot of questions. I mean, Brock Nelson, what is he? Is he a 22-goal scorer? No one knows because of his early season heroics and then falling apart. Anders Lee, you guys already questioned him. Is he going to get better? Is he going to get worse? Is his shooting percentage going to stay high? I mean, John Tavares is John Tavares. He might be the only non-question mark on there. Ryan Strome, sophomore slump. Kyle Posa, what's with his eye? Josh Bailey, are we going to get the Josh Bailey you saw last year who was a decent NHL player? Or the Josh Bailey from 2008 to 2014 where we wanted to hang him? I mean, it goes on and on. There's so many question marks around this team. I guess you could say that about every team, but the fact that every team around us got better and we didn't, it's just not a good feeling for me right now. I mean, I still think this team's a good team. I think we'll make the playoffs, but there's questions to be answered. Duffy, we'll start with you. Duffy, we'll start with you.
I think we lost Duffy.
Well, Stuffy?
Unmute your mic. I guess we lost Duffy. All right, Mike, we'll go to you.
Pete, I echo a lot of what you just said. Yeah, this team is definitely not a shoo-in as presently constructed for a playoff spot. I mean, they obviously have a lot of talent, especially up front there. You know, they have some quality depth, but I mean, you said it. I mean, the defense is thin as far as depth goes. This team last year was extremely streaky, and obviously we still have no matter who we bring in year after year, we have the same third period issues. So obviously, to me, that points a lot at the coaching staff and the mindset of the team. It is worrisome that it does feel a lot like 2013 all over again. That summer where we had a nice little playoff appearance. Everyone kind of thought we were on the upswing, and then obviously we didn't come anywhere close to the playoffs in 2014, or excuse me, 2014. So yeah, it's a little troublesome to see that everyone in the division kind of made moves to improve the squad. We've kind of stood pat, and our big off-season move is hoping that these young kids progress. Which, if this was a video game, it would probably be a fantastic strategy. Unfortunately, you see it too many times where not every young kid is going to improve. Sometimes they're gonna regress, and if these guys regress at all, we really have nothing else to fall back on. You're basically you're hoping for another MVP type season from Tavares, and if that happens, then you're hoping that Strom takes the next step, Nelson takes the next step, Lee, You hope that guys like Grabowski and Oposo can stay healthy. So it's a lot of question marks. I mean, fortunately, the other teams in the division have question marks as well. Um, but I don't think I think we had a real chance this summer to take another step, add another piece, and really solidify ourselves as not only a legitimate contender to win the division, but a legitimate contender to maybe make a big deep run in the playoffs. Not to say it can't happen as presently constructed, but I think we saw in the playoffs injuries happen, especially on defense. We're thin back there. I don't know. It's tough to watch everyone else kind of make big moves, and we kind of sit on the sidelines. But maybe patience works out this time. I just think that it's not the best strategy, considering 2 years ago we did the same thing. It seems like, and we know how that turned out.
Andrew, what do you got to say?
I do agree with everything you guys said about us not improving. We didn't. I mean, we just brought in Grice. We're really hoping for the kids to step up. I think they can, but you can't bank on that. And like Mike said, this is our opportunity to add this new piece and really take a step forward. And there's obviously still the opportunity for it to happen, but it hasn't happened yet, and we got to think that it may not. So yeah, they definitely needed to make moves. You're right, Pete. It does feel like that 2013 offseason where they had that nice run at the end and made the playoffs, and then we added Bouchard and Regan, and they were disasters. In terms of the other teams in the division, I'm not convinced that any of them really got that much better. Pittsburgh added offense. I don't understand why. Offense has never been their problem. So they finally got Phil Kessel. Okay, their defense is way worse than it was at the beginning of last year. They lost Paul Martin. Who knows if Oli Mata is going to stay healthy? Who knows if Chris Letang is going to stay healthy? Derek Pouliot just finished up a solid rookie year between the NHL and the AHL, so he could be a pretty good defenseman, but you can't bank on that. Ian Cole is nothing more than a number 5 in my opinion, and I don't even know who's on their bottom pair there anymore. So yeah, they added more offense to their offense, which is already one of the best in the league. I'm not convinced that they got any better. In fact, I think they got worse. And the Columbus Blue Jackets, they definitely did get better getting Brandon Saad. I don't think their center depth is that great. I mean, Brandon Dubinsky is not an offensive guy. I mean, he gets 50 points, but you can't rely on him to get you 60, in a second pair role. Even though I think, maybe Brandon Saad pads the stats a little bit, I think Columbus did get better, but they definitely still could have improved other places. Their defense isn't great either. They traded away James Wisniewski. Jack Johnson is a solid number 3, but he's being their number 1. Ryan Murray hasn't progressed yet. Fedor Tutin is a very good defenseman, but also not a number 1. And the Capitals, I mean, we saw it firsthand in the playoffs. Troy Brouwer and Joel Ward were really good, especially Joel Ward. He was great against the Islanders, and they lost the 2 of them and replaced them with Williams and Oshie. I think Williams was the perfect signing for the Capitals. I really wish he didn't sign there, because now we know that their first line is going to be better if Williams plays with Ovechkin and Backstrom. But I think TJ Oshie is extremely overrated. I don't think he's going to be a difference maker on that team compared to what Brouwer brought or Joel Ward. So they essentially replaced Ward and Brouwer with Williams and Oshie, and I'm not totally convinced that that's a huge upgrade. And that's my take on the rest of the division. I mean, the Flyers I still don't think are going to make the playoffs. Their defense is still terrible. I mean, Amac is still playing top minutes there, and we all know he can't do that anymore. Mark Streit, this may be the year that he finally doesn't produce for the Flyers, even though he's had a really good first couple of years. And their center depth is terrible with LeCavalier. Braden Chen's not a center anymore. And the Hurricanes and the Devils, yeah, they're not making the playoffs, either one of those guys. But, I mean, I'm not totally convinced that the division got that much better that we still can't contend. I know we needed to get better also, and we didn't do that, but I'm not totally convinced that they're this great division that we're going to slump because of the improvements that some of these teams made.
Yeah, I'm gonna go the exact opposite way that Andrews went because our division got a hell of a lot better. Pittsburgh, I know offense was never their issue, but they added a lot of depth, which they've lacked in the past couple of years, and their top end is better than it's been in a while. Columbus obviously added Brandon Saad, which is a huge improvement for them. They still have a top tier goaltender, and they should be healthy this season, which is the only reason they didn't contend last year. Their defense is obviously still weak, but it's not like many defenses in the Metropolitan are strong. Um, Carolina's pesky; they always haunt us. Philly, we have issues with them. Jersey's the only team that we really are better than and will beat most times we play them. The Rangers are the Rangers. The Capitals got better, obviously. Their defense is still a question mark, but they lost a little depth on offense. Their top six is incredible. And I think the issue comes down to the fact that I would say we're the fourth best, maybe fifth best team in our division right now. And it all comes down to whether or not there are going to be four teams in the Atlantic that make the playoffs. So you got Montreal and Tampa Bay up top. And I think Florida and Detroit can make it there too. So it's going to be tough to see where we kind of slide in there. And us missing the playoffs would not be the most insane thing I've heard of. So
I know me and Duffy talked about this offline a few days ago, but it's kind of scary to think the Islanders, in my opinion, have the seventh worst goalie in the division. You got Lundqvist at the top, then you got Corey Schneider, Braden Holtby, then you got Bobrovsky, and you got Steve Mason and Fleury, and then you got Halak at seven, in my opinion. And then you got the Carolina goalies, whoever they start, Cam Ward or Eddie Lack or Kudobin. I don't know what they're going to do, but Halak's better than them. But, I mean, if you've listened before, I'm not the biggest fan of Halak. I think he's extremely overrated by Islander fans. And in a division with a lot of good goalies, the Islanders have been average goalie. So I don't know if you guys think that'll make a difference.
I mean, it is fair to point out though that while their goaltending is one of the weaker in the division and one of the more average throughout the league, they do have arguably the second best defense in the division, which is more a reflection of the weak defenses around the division than the strengths on theirs. But when healthy, I'd say the Rangers are better than them, and that's the only one that really stands out. So I think their strengths comparatively even out. They have a better defense than most teams and at least an even offense. But it's going to be a lot tougher for them this year than it was last year, in my opinion.
Mike, you have anything to add?
Um, yeah, I mean he's not consistent, Halak. I mean he played well in the playoffs, but yeah, it's you're right. Arguably, he's the sixth or seventh best goalie in the division, and for a team and for I think a division that's going to be extremely tight all year for the most part at the top, it's you know it's definitely a disadvantage to kind of be the guy with the weakest goalie. So we'll see what happens, but I'm not it's a tough division. I don't think we did enough as of yet to really guarantee a playoff spot. And again, that just it's a little worried. It's worrisome and it's frustrating too because you would think after 2 years ago that we would have tried a different strategy. And maybe we did. He just couldn't land anyone. But it's there's no you don't get any medals for trying to land a player. Either you get them or you don't. So
Yeah. We'll move on to the next question, and it's going to be about Kyle Oposo, the big name on the current team. Kyle is an unrestricted free agent at the conclusion of this season. He's finishing a steal of a 5-year contract where he makes an average of $2.8 million a year. Around the draft, Arthur Staple tweeted that the Islanders were putting Kyle Oposo on the trade block. Nothing happened there, but with some recent signings, including Derek Stepan getting $6.5 million from the Rangers, and today Jakub Voracek getting over $8 million a year from the Flyers. Those are some two pretty good comparables for Kyle. And do you guys think that the Islanders should look into moving Kyle? Do you guys think that Kyle Oposo is worthy of a contract probably north of $7 million a year, especially with his injury history, his recent injury history, and the fact that his production might be inflated by John Tavares, even though that's arguable. But basically, in the Islanders' current structure with their roster and their salary structure, is Kyle Oposo a long-term fit here? And if he's not, how do you go about this upcoming year with his contract and where he plays on the team? Whether you move him before the year at the deadline, Duffy will start with you.
I think at this point, Oposo has got to be moved. Voracek, I think, was a good comparison. Maybe a little more production, so we get a little more money. But Oposo is going to garner about 7.5, and that's something that I'm not willing to pay him. I'm pretty sure, as far as I know, Garth Snow is not willing to pay him. And maybe there's a team out there that is, but it's not the Islanders at this moment. They don't see the value there because, in reality, he's played maybe 100, 120 games at a really high level. If he has another great season, I consider if he really puts up, 80, 90 points this year, then I'd have to think long and hard about it. But at this point, I think their best option would be to keep looking for deals for him, see what the best they can do is, and if someone really blows them away, you got to make the move because he's not yet worth that kind of money, and they don't have that kind of money to put into him, and that's where you can kind of maybe see the Kuhlman and Grabowski deals coming into play. So that's my 2 cents on it.
Mike, what do you got to say?
I mean, yeah, you always have to explore trade options with any of your guys, especially if it's someone on the last year of a contract. But I don't think I'm not of the opinion you have to. If he walks away at the end of the season and you don't trade him for anything, that it's this colossal failure. Obviously, a lot of it depends on how the season goes. And yeah, before the season, if somebody offers Snow a package which brings in a roster player and maybe some help, some future, picks or draft or prospects. You think long and hard about it, but I don't think they're good enough right now, the Islanders, to basically say, okay, well, we're just going to dump a Poso before the season for 50 cents on the dollar because God forbid he walks at the end of the year. He's still there. Arguably their second best forward, and we were just talking before how the team made no upgrades on the roster outside of a backup goaltender position, and a lot of their improvement will hopefully come from just internal progression from a lot of the younger players. So I don't think they're in a position to just move him unless they're getting back a proven roster player in a package, and again, whether that consists of someone with a longer contract, maybe a lesser player but longer term, whatever the case might be. But then you see how the season goes. I mean, if they're a legitimate playoff team and obviously a legitimate contender for to make some noise, and I don't care if he's not signed. You still have to keep him then. You can't come March 1st, whatever the deadline is, say, well, oh, you know what, we're solidified in a playoff spot. We think we're good enough to win a couple of rounds, but because he's not signed and he may walk at the end of the season, we're going to trade him for a first-round pick. That's a very quick, in my opinion, a very quick way to piss off the fan base and also maybe even lose some of the players in the locker room who would probably look around and say, you're telling me that this team, which we're doing so well, but we're actually going to take players away because they're not signed. If he walks at the end of the season and you get nothing in return, it's part of the business. You get him for the year, you see what he does. Again, hopefully it's a successful year. But yeah, if they're out of the playoff race or they're having a bad year come the deadline, then you obviously be more aggressive and you try to move him if you don't think he's part of your long-term plans. But I wouldn't feel comfortable giving him more than like $6.5 million a year. But if someone's willing to pay him 7 or 7+, then he should absolutely take the money, especially with his recent eye injury.
Andrew, what have you got to say?
I actually agree with Mike. I think moving him now or even at the deadline is premature, wrong, whatever you want to call it. I mean, we need his production. Now, if he's not producing and we still get a solid package for him at the deadline, then move him. But I expect him to be kind of the Kyle Oposo we've seen from the last couple of years, where he does produce, but he still has his flaws. But I think we can all kind of be in agreement that unless he wants to take a major pay cut and sign for $5 million instead of $7 million, or he really breaks out and we're convinced he's this consistent, top player in the NHL, then he's not going to be an Islander next year. Like Mike said, I wouldn't move him yet uh, unless we get a roster player and a couple assets back. For example, this wouldn't happen, but if you get a player like Brett Ritchie from the Dallas Stars, Kyle Palmieri when he was with the Anaheim Ducks, now he's with the Devils, and then like a pieces with that, that's the kind of deal that I would have moved Oposo for right now as opposed to later. But yeah, there's no reason to trade him now if we're contending and we're trying to contend. And I think, yeah, it sucks that he may not come back because we've come to really like him, even though he's had his inconsistencies. But it may be time to let him go. And I'm a little higher on prospects than most in terms of I think that they pan out. I expect them to pan out a little bit more than most, and I really think that in the future, Ryan Strome's going to be Tavares' go-to right wing, and I really think Josh Hosang is going to be this really awesome NHL player. And I'm not saying let's let Oposo go because we have Hosang, but I feel a little better letting him go if we let Oposo go, get someone like Drew Stafford, not actually Drew Stafford, but a kind of player like him for a couple of years, and then let Hosang come into the NHL, developed and ready to go. But I'm gonna miss Kyle if he does leave, but it seems like the writing on the wall is that yeah, he's eventually gonna be gone.
As for me, looking back at it now, it might seem a little naive, but I think Garth might have felt the same way. I never pictured Kyle Oposo as the type of player to make $7 million a year. I mean, this has been a guy that's been in the organization since 2006. He's been through all the bad years. He's had his up and downs. I don't know. I just always felt that he'd take a reasonable contract between $5 and $6 million and want to stay with the team to build. But I guess once negotiations started, and that's probably why the trade rumor came out, Kyle wasn't really willing to take a hometown discount or a pay cut to stick around with the Islanders. But I mean, we all would have liked to see that, but it's definitely his right to explore free agency. But I don't know. To me, it always seemed like Kyle was the type of player that was an Islander for life, so to say. And the fact that it's getting more and more noticeable that it might not be the case, I mean, it's weird because I know amongst our group, it's kind of like we're already like diminishing Oposo and trying to like deal with the fact that he might be an Islander and like talking about like, oh, his eye injury, oh, he's an average player, oh, so and so is better than Oposo. Like, I don't know. I mean, we all love Kyle, but the way like this last month and a half has gone, I feel like it's already starting to break apart the relationship with the Islanders and their fans. Just personally, I love Kyle Oposo. I think he's a borderline elite player when healthy. But like everyone said, I'm not paying him over. The guy's never scored 30 goals. He's never passed 70 points. I'm not paying the guy over $6.5 million a year, even though he probably deserves more than that. I don't know if anyone has anything to add to that.
Yeah, well, I will just say, I mean, whatever the rumors, whatever the initial offers that were, I'm assuming that they were exchanged between Oposo and Garth Snow. It's to me just negotiation 101. Obviously Snow leaks the rumor that we're looking to trade him. We don't know if we could sign him, and obviously in the hope that maybe Oposo comes back and says, hey, you know what, maybe I'll take a couple bucks less to stay with the team. But listen, there's a lot of time between now and July 1st when he becomes a free agent. A lot could happen. Again, put it this way: if he goes out and puts up, as Duffy said, 80-point season, and is consistent, is healthy, really establishes himself as a top flight winger, and to be fair, he's on the cusp, I think. But as Andrew said as well, he has some flaws which we're all aware of. But if he can kind of clean up those flaws, I would, and he puts up 80 points, I'd be happy to give him a $7.5 million contract, and I'd say, you know what, I'll pay him $7.5 million a year. And I'll move other guys. I'll move, Josh Bailey's contract. I'll move Grabowski's contract. I'll move these guys because then to me, the Oposo becomes a guy you want to keep around, you want to build around. But I just think based on his history, what he's done so far to date, it's more likely that he'll put up, about 60, 65 points, which is still a very good season. and I don't think that warrants, right now for him to get $7.5 million a year. That to me is between 6 and 6.5. But we'll see what happens. I just think it's still early in the process. I don't think it's time to, the divorce is there yet. But I do agree with you, Pete. It seems like a lot of fans have kind of in their heads already put the idea in that, come this time next year he'll be signed elsewhere, and let's start kind of diminishing his production now, because when he leaves, it's like a coping mechanism. And I think it's a little bit unfair because he has been very productive the last couple of years when he's healthy. And I think he is a very good player. And again, I think arguably our second best forward. So we'll see what happens.
You guys have anything to add, Duffy?
I think it's all been covered.
Yeah, I'm good here.
All right. We'll do some quick fan questions. It's a yes or no question from at C Vancherry. Does KO get dealt this offseason or this coming season? Yes or no, Mike?
No, he doesn't get dealt. He will finish the year with the Islanders. I don't know where he is next year, but he will finish 2015-16 with the Islanders.
Duffy.
Yes, he gets dealt. It won't be a great deal. It'll be better than the Vanek one, but people won't be happy. But I don't see him finishing the season with us.
Andrew.
I think he finishes the season with us, and who knows what happens next year, but he finishes the season as an Islander.
I think he'll sign an extension before the new year.
Bold.
Yeah, that's the way I like to live. Next question is Isles for Life 96. Can the Islanders afford to keep Oposo this year, Ryan Strome next year, and JT a couple years after that? Or should we prepare to lose one of them? Mike, we'll start with you.
Yeah, I mean, they can afford it, obviously. They just, obviously would have to move some contracts around. Will it happen? I don't think so, because I don't agree with Pete. I don't think Oposo is going to re-sign here an extension, but if they really wanted to, I think they could. They would just have to move some other guys and kind of build around those three, but I don't think that will be the case.
Strome's going nowhere. JT's going nowhere. Oposo is up in the air, but as I said, I think he'll stay. Duffy.
I mean, there is a reason that Kuhlman and Grabowski come off the books the same year Tavares needs his extension or his new deal. They're going to pay Tavares. They should be trying to get Strome an extension as soon as possible. And like Mike said, if they really want to, if they really commit, if they move a guy like Clutterbuck, they can easily fit all three of them on the books and then have some issues in the lower six. But if those three guys are you're going to commit to as your core, you can make room for them.
Andrew.
Tavares is going nowhere. Not really sure why this guy even included him in his question. He's going to sign a contract like Kane and Taves, maybe a little more just because it's him and not his partner in crime like Kane and Taves are with each other. So I expect Tavares to sign a huge contract like $11 million a year, maybe even 11.5. Strome stays, and I think Oposo's the one that's gone.
All right, Josh Barely. I'm sure Mike loves that name. Probably Andrew too.
Love it. Love it.
Why does this team insist on spinning their wheels in various places instead of adding productive players to complement their current pieces? Mike, we'll start with you. Make it quicker.
I know this is definitely a Josh Barley question. You know what? I don't necessarily. I don't know if I agree that they're spinning their wheels. As I said before, I just think they've essentially maxed out this roster as far as just flexibility. I mean, if they brought in a forward, I mean, who you get rid of? I just think they essentially. It's kind of weird. They almost have too many forwards, and they've essentially, as we said before, they've kind of committed to this defense, right or wrong. So, in their mind, they probably think they have the right roster going forward to be a perennial contender. Obviously, and I think their method or their way that they will complement, bring in complementary pieces is through the draft. I know it. I understand his question. I understand his why he's pissed essentially because it's been a very slow summer. I just think that right now, looking at the overall team, I just don't think they're. I essentially think they've maxed out the roster flexibility with all these contracts, long-term deals, and maybe next year you'll start to see them let guys go and try to bring in some new blood. I think they're going to kind of give this group one more go around to see if they're good enough to make some noise.
I kind of agree with that. Before the season, my ideal team was trading Franz and Grabner to get the cash off the books,
Yeah.
signing a top six forward, or trading for one like Sharp or Oshie, and then having Hickey as a 7D man and signing a top four guy. And that's looking like it's not going to happen. So the team pretty much stayed the same. And like I said, one injury to the defense and Brian Straight's in there, which is scares me. I'm going to have nightmares all summer. And the forwards, I mean, I feel like we need a top six guy that's a sure thing to produce, which is we don't really have that right now outside of Tavares. I mean, you could argue Strome and Oposo, but Strome's a young kid who's going to have his ups and downs, and Oposo might be legally blind. Who knows with his eye? So, Duffy, what do you say?
I think a lot of it comes down to the fact that, as we have seen a lot, Snow likes to keep his own guys, take care of his own guys. I think part of that was the Hickey deal where he could have given Hickey less money shorter term and gone out and got another defenseman. But Hickey was one of his projects, a guy he dumpster dove for and made a career out of. So take care of him, give him his deal, give him his money. And that's something Snow likes to do, so he likes to keep it in the organization. And that's just his style. I mean, it's not much else to it. We'd all love to see him go out and get, at the very least, a depth defenseman and a nice forward, but it's really never how he's operated. I mean, he's taken a couple shots, and none of them worked out all too well. So, I mean, like him or hate him, it's how he does things. We got to live with that at this point.
Andrew, to you.
Just in terms of like responding to the why aren't they adding pieces, if you look at the moves that these teams made, like for example the Sod move and the Sharp move, we didn't have the pieces to get those done. The Sharp was traded for a top four defenseman and another bottom grinder. I mean, you would have had to give it up to Hahn and somebody like Matt Martin or Cizikas to get Sharp, and I don't think that would have been a good move. And with someone like Saad, I mean, they got Anisimov and Marco Dano, and that's our equivalent of, say, Franz and Dalcol or Hosang. I mean, Dano's a very good prospect, and I know he was only a 27th overall pick, and not only a 27th overall pick.
I would have did that in a heartbeat if I was the Islanders then. If that's the equivalent, I would have did that in a heartbeat.
In terms of like Nielsen and Dalcol, but they also added a couple other pieces, and I don't disagree with you. I mean, Brandon Saad, he probably the only player I would have traded Dalcol for, but the Islanders love Dalcol, and they weren't going to move him for that many pieces, and I don't know why they haven't moved Franz yet, but I think, in terms of Sharp, I mean, they weren't going to be able to get him, and it's hard to make some trades. I mean, we didn't have the assets. We didn't have a first-round pick last year. We had to trade Reinhardt to get a couple back. And I believe in some of these players. I mean, Josh Barely, I mean, that's the perfect name because I can't stand him, and I think he's the only player to upgrade on. But, I mean, it's hard to just add all these pieces, especially since we didn't have some of the pieces that some of these teams were looking for. And I think that we definitely still need to make that upgrade, but it wasn't as easy to just say, why didn't they add complementary pieces?
Speaking of...
It is also possible that Snow might be a little bit nervous, hesitant to make a deal where he gives up multiple pieces for one, where he'd give up a Nielsen, a Dalcol, another prospect, and a pick for Assad, because we saw, the one time we really went for it there was the Molson and 2 picks for Vanek, and that backfired miserably. So
well, it's completely different.
Some shell shock. I know it's a different situation, but it's the same kind of concept where you move all these pieces for one player and it backfires. So I think he might be a little hesitant there.
I think the reason he's hesitant is Saad was a restricted free agent, and we just talked about the Islanders possibly having to get rid of one of Oposo, Tavares, or Strome, which no team should want to do. Saad signed for over $5 million a year. Dalcol's going to provide 3 years of under $1 million. I mean, it's just, you got to think of the cap, and it's scary to think about considering we were talking about the salary cap floor 14 months ago. But the ceiling's right there, and if you add Saad to the Islanders right now. I mean, Oposo is definitely a goner, and Tavares negotiations could get icky, sticky, whatever. But yeah,
I wouldn't
next,
worry about that at all. Tavares is signing. I'm not worried about him at all.
yeah, if he's signing, if you're going to pay him at least $10 million a year, and then you're going to have to get rid of your depth, which is what makes this offense so potent and dangerous.
I,
So
I
it's not
don't.
as simple
I
as
don't think. I mean, it's 4 years away. I don't think Tavares is getting 10 million. We'll see how the contracts go, but I think you'll see a leveling off of contracts because I just don't think the cap's going to go up enough. And I think he might get like 8.5 or 9, but I don't see him getting 10, unless the cap really jumps up.
I don't know. Voracek got almost 9 today.
Voracek's a. I mean, he's a. I think Voracek's an elite offensive
I
player.
do
I'm not
too.
saying he's not as good as Tavares, I don't think, but he's definitely, I think, an upper echelon player in the league.
I mean, I would be shocked if he signed for less than 10 million. But moving on. First time tweeter, long time fan. What up? What up? What adjustments to special teams personnel will be made? From Scotty Don's 87. I mean, if you really look at it, the Islanders' penalty kill improved greatly in the second half of the year. And as we've said before, I don't think our PK personnel is that bad with Franz, Zizekas, Clutterbuck, Kuhlman, Grabner when he's in there,
Even
Brock,
Grabowski from PK.
Strom, Grabowski. I mean, our forwards are there. We have Hamonic, Boychuk, Letty, Dahan, killing penalties. I mean, the personnel's there. I mean, the Islanders obviously made a change to their system midway through the year, and it worked out. I mean, if you remember in the playoffs, I think the Capitals only scored one power play goal, and that was the best power play in the league. And if we scored one power play goal, we're probably right there. In terms of the power play, I mean, they have all the talent in the world. It's a middle of the road power play. It should be better. But I mean, I don't know what else. I don't think Doug Wade's going anywhere. I think he has a free pass in this organization. I think the Islanders want to keep him around for better or worse. Mike, we'll start with you.
Yeah, I mean, I think power play wise, they just got to get more pucks to the net. I feel like they get a little too. I mean, it's funny because they always say it on the telecast, especially Butch Gorin, that they get a little too cute with their passing sometimes, and they overpass. I think they just need to be keep it a little simpler on the power play, especially if they're going to keep either Nelson or Lee on the top power play unit, and to kind of cause some trouble in front. And I think they should have Boychuk on the top unit and not Franz Nielsen, because Boychuk obviously has a tremendous shot, and I think earlier in the season when the power play wasn't really clicking, Boychuk was a key component of that. And I think, as you said for the penalty kill, they seemed to make adjustments as the season went on. They improved greatly. They had a good showing in the playoffs. I think they let up 2 power play goals. Could be wrong. I thought it was 2. One, I think, like Backstrom just kind of walked in, and everyone kind of backed off him, and he just took a wrist shot in game 2. Which is not traditionally how you would score a power play goal, but I think the PK. I just think it's don't do that stupid one guy high, and I think they just need to be a little more aggressive. But yeah, I do think they improved greatly as the season wore on in that department. So hopefully they will kind of whatever strategy they used, they'll continue to do that. And obviously, I agree. I think they have enough talent to be successful in both units. It's just a matter of getting the most out of it.
Andrew, we'll go to you.
I think the biggest changes to the personnel has to be getting rid of Cronin. He's just an awful, awful PK coach. Even though it did work out towards the end, that awful start just convinced me that he's just not a good penalty killing coach, especially with his, really awful year that he had in Toronto the year before. But we've said the personnel is there. I mean, Franz and Grabner were the most deadly penalty kill, one of the most deadly penalty kills we've ever seen. I mean, they scored better shorthanded than we did on our power play. And Grabowski, Kuhlman, I think, is a great penalty killer. And then we have the defense that, the biggest problem we had with our penalty kill, and I'll never understand why it kept being a problem, was every time we tried to dump the puck, we did it through the middle of the ice, and it got caught by a defenseman, jumping up and catching it with his hand. All you got to do is just dump it off the wall or off the boards, and voila, it's outside, and you just killed the penalty. But I know that's a lot. It's a lot harder than what I said. But just that seems to be their biggest problem. And with the power play, I mean, you're right. Doug Wade has a free pass here. He's gonna coach the power play. But you saw they had a great power play in 2013 when they made the playoffs. I mean, those two penalty killing teams were or penalty killing or special team units were the best in the league. So I think that Franz on the point was terrible, and they got to just put him on the in the corner or in the on the half wall instead of on the point. Keep Boychuk back on the point because his bomb really changed the power play, and hopefully Letty develops and really becomes a good penalty or power play quarterback because he was okay at it, but we know how good Letty is, and he can definitely develop into a better power play quarterback. But in terms of like the biggest problem, I'd say it's the coaches.
Yeah, and I think you guys have touched on it enough that like there's no personnel issues. We have all the pieces. We just kind of got to get it figured out. Put Letty and Boychuk at the point, and then you can mix and match the forward groups for the first and second units. And the PK, again, you have the guys, just work on the system.
And last question from Ryan Real 02. Is this defensive core consistent enough for a long run into the playoffs? Do you think Garth should have went and picked up a D-man? No, I don't think this defensive core is good enough, as I've said at least 5 times already. Brian Strait is the next man up if something happens, and something will happen considering Travis Hamonic has a history of injuries, whether it's concussion, his knee last spring. Calvin DeHaan can't sneeze without getting hurt, it seems. Thomas Hickey, he's been terrible, but his size is always going to scare you. Ryan Pulak's a rookie. I mean, an injury to Boychuk or Letty, God forbid. This defense isn't good enough. I mean, you really need insulation for a kid like Ryan Pulak. And what if he doesn't? We saw it with Matt Donovan in 2013 when they wanted him to replace Mark Strait. It just didn't work out, and it pretty much put the team in a terrible position. I mean, if Pulak doesn't work out, or if DeHaan suffers an injury in training camp, you're gonna have Strait paired with Pulak on the bottom pair. That's setting the kid up to fail. I mean, like I said, there are defensemen out there on the free agent market right now. Cody Franson or Christian Ehrhoff with Mazzaros. I'm definitely missing a few names, but Ehrhoff said he wants to go to a contender. Right? Believe it or not, the Islanders could be considered a contender right now. Throw the guy 1 year, 3.5, $4 million. I'm sure we won't end up regretting it, and it'll make our team a lot stronger. Mike, what do you got to say?
I agree 100%. I don't think the defense is deep enough, and it's. I mean, we were down for number 9 and 10 defensemen by last playoff, so I don't anticipate anything really being too much different this year if we get there. So we definitely need at least one more quality defenseman who can play, 15 minutes a night and not embarrass himself. So. Yeah, I'm with you, Pete. I think there's still a few decent options out there, and the team needs to be proactive. And again, they just can't sit on their hands and then assume that everything's going to go perfect and there'll be no issues. I agree. It's setting up for failure.
Duffy, will go to you.
I think that this team does have the defensive core. If you mean just the 6 guys we're going to put on the ice and hope they stay healthy, but the issue is they're not going to stay healthy. There's going to be injuries. If in a perfect world we had a healthy team through the entire season, our defense would be good enough to keep us going. We have one of the better defenses in the division, like I said earlier. The problem is, like Pete keeps saying, Brian Strait is our 7th defenseman. Beyond that, it's just all question marks. I mean, injuries will happen, and at this point we need some kind of contingency plan for when that does.
Andrew, to you.
Yeah, I mean it's basically been said. We're one defenseman away from being a real contender. We get that Ehrhoff. I think you're trading for someone like Alec Martinez, something like that. That's the defenseman that we need, and that Mike and I were in agreement with having Hickey on that contract really locked him in as a defenseman that we just don't agree with, and getting that one more defenseman would make this team consistent enough, but with what we have right now, they're just not. And you gotta hope that nobody gets hurt, and if they do, it's gonna suck because Brian Strait's gonna come in, and we're a one defenseman getting hurt away from really having a disaster on defense.
Looking at the free agent list right now, we have Wisnowski, Mazzaros, Ehrhoff, Cody Franson, Jan Hayda, Marek Zidlicki, any of these guys, any of them. I mean, if they're unemployed,
Marek
we're approaching
Zidlitsky sucks. I can't stand Marek Zidlitsky. It's awful.
still a good power play quarterback, but as we're approaching August
Maybe
1st,
the strength of Thomas Hickey, and they're just gonna be terrible.
you could shake up the pairings, put Hamonic with Pulak or whatever you want to do. But as I'm saying, it's August 1st tomorrow, and these guys are unemployed waiting for a phone call. Make the call, Garth. Make the call.
That was deep.
Thanks, Duffy. You learned that in college.
Okay.
Well, that'll wrap it up for us today. I'd like to thank you all for listening, and I'd like to thank you guys for joining me. Anyone have any final words?
I think I'm good. Said a lot today.
Yeah, I think I've said my piece, and let's hope in a month from now we have an extra defenseman to talk about here.
Andrew, I want something strong. These two are
Oh,
weak.
God, you're putting me on the spot. I have work tomorrow. I'm hoping for a strong year. I think that they can deliver a strong year. It's just there are a lot of question marks, and hopefully we get past them.
All right, that'll do. Thank you
All right.
once again. Have a good night, and let's go Islanders.
Pleasure, everybody.